It's like literally.
Hey, all right, welcome back to What Did I Want to Be When I Grew Up? Today we have our guest Kim with us. Hey, Kim, good to see you.
Morning, Jeremy.
And of course, Sam. Yo, Sam.
Hey, everybody.
All right, we've got our background today. You'll see a little bit later when we talk to Kim about what she wanted to be and what she was for a time. The background will become relevant. Just wait for it. We'll be there. But first, Kim, what do you want to you give us a little introduction? Tell us about yourself for a minute.
Hi, my name's Kim, and I'm currently a project manager at a tech company, which has nothing to do with what I wanted to be when I grew up.
So,
That's a very common scenario, right?
Right? Sort of a bummer, though.
Yeah.
The job now really fits where I'm at in life as
so
a young mother, but
roughly,
still.
tell us a little bit about that. You don't need to go into a lot of detail, but just a quick overview. What do you do with the tech company?
Currently, I project manage the production of coursework. So people like Jeremy, who create video courses online for Pluralsight, I mostly keep them on track. Sometimes it involves gentle nudging, other times it involves nagging, and it involves a lot of keeping track of their workflows and telling them what to do in a great way because I like working with them almost all of the time.
Almost.
Almost.
We're
You you squeezed that in.
not going to ask about the almost, and I really hope I'm not in that group because, well,
Not yet.
not, I'm in trouble now. Nice. So keeping things on track and all of that kind of thing. So there is a connection though between what you're doing because, like you said, you're with a company that you create online courses and training, and you teach people new skills. How did that relate to some of the things you wanted to be when you were growing up?
Well, when I was little, I wanted to be a doctor, primarily because my mom would put us to bed and then go in the kitchen and watch the tiny TV on top of the fridge. She'd watch ER, and oh, man, Dr. Green. 5-year-old me, big fan of Dr. Green, but also
Nice.
Dr. Ross, right? And you got Dr. Elizabeth Corday coming in later, and you've got Dr. Carter. Like all of those things greatly impacted what I really thought was real. Because as a little kid, you only know what your parents do and what like your aunts and uncles maybe do. But if you were to say like, "Oh, I work at a tech company," as a child, that means nothing. You're a grown up sitting at a desk at a computer or watching doctors on TV. I was like, oh, I'm gonna cut people open. This is gonna be fantastic. I'm gonna be able to solve problems, right? And
That's
then as I got older, I went to school and I was like, oh my God, my teachers are actually incredible, right? Mrs. Hagan, killing it. Mrs. Eiserman, kindergarten teacher. Mrs. Buck, fourth grade. I still know their names, right?
mhm.
And if I see them on the internet, it fills me with joy. And that when you're exposed to something, that's what you want to be, right? And like
Yeah.
little kids are obsessed with garbage trucks because they live pretty small lives and that's what they see during the day. My son currently kisses every fire truck we see in a book because like that's where we're at. We could be a fireman because he's had no exposure to anything else. But I wanted to be either a teacher or a doctor based on the only two jobs that I saw really in society.
I love that. You're right. I'd never thought of it in that context. But when you're little kids, your world is very much you, your parents, your whatever your immediate family is. That group of friends, maybe once you're kind of getting closer to school age, because usually you don't have a lot of that. My parents actually took a lot of effort to help expose my siblings and myself to different, at least to the extent they could, to a little bit different opportunities. So one time they had a friend from college, and that there's a whole story behind that. It was apparently he was somebody that my mother had dated for a while. So there was this whole weird sort of love triangle thing that I don't know if it really was a thing or not, but he ended up being in a medical field working at doing some research at University of Utah, and they sent myself and a couple of my siblings up to spend half a day or a day with him at his job at the University of Utah Medical Center, and it was fascinating. It opened up to whole new worlds. And at some point, I think I totally identify with you that at one point you really wanted to be a doctor. For a while I did too, and I think that experience made a big part of that.
Having like any experience with a thing makes a concrete impact, right? Like even long
Yeah.
after I had gone to college to be a teacher, I had a teaching scholarship from Golden Apple of Illinois. I knew I was going to be a teacher.
Hmm.
Then I got a Fulbright grant to be a teacher in India, right? Like the signs were there. That's where I was going. I ended up at a hospital working for a week with another guy who was on a Fulbright, and they were doing a C-section, and the power went out, and I had an iPhone and got to hold the light over it.
No way.
And I was like, this is great. Right? And like at the time, I was still like, I could still be a doctor. Right? I'm already an actually accredited teacher with a teaching job. I could change. And so that's always been sort of in the back of my mind. Like
Okay,
if my kid grows up and we've got the money, I might still be a doctor. I don't know.
There are like
Not sure.
10 things to unwrap from that conversation. Did you say you went to India at one point?
I did. I had a Fulbright grant from the U.S. State Department. So after I
Cool.
graduated college, I took that Fulbright, and then I had been in New Delhi, but I had like a half-term break during the school year, and another dude was doing his Fulbright in Maharashtra at a Jamkhed. It's a public health hospital,
Mhm.
and they do a lot of community health work where they train underprivileged women like Dalit caste to be doing the health work in these villages, so sort of promoting them up. And he was there, and I was like, sounds like a free vacation. So I flew there and got myself there, and ended up just helping out when needed.
That is so cool. I had a brother who lived in India with his very young children. You know, so youngest kids were not much older than your son is right now, and they moved the whole family to India, and he was working for a tech company there, training and mentoring and doing human resources and things like that. They spent several years there, and one of the things I remember the most is how they said, "Yeah, you're never quite sure when the power will be on or off, at least in the part of the country they lived. I'm sure it's more reliable in others, but dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, how it impacts things like medicine, like you said, holding your iPhone
Oh my goodness.
as the light
It's huge.
while they're delivering the baby, right? It's just a different mindset.
It is,
Wow.
and you get accustomed to it, right? You accommodate yourself to where you live, and you
Yeah.
learn to adapt. Like currently, I live in a mountain in Utah. Now every day we snowblow.
Mhm.
That's the new adaptation, right? I lived in Russia for a while. I learned how to walk everywhere and take the metro and speak Russian and look angry all the time because that's not necessarily my resting face, right? Like I'm usually pleasantly bemused, but like you adapt to where you are culturally, and even in a job, right? You adapt to the workforce that you're in because you don't have a choice. You
Nice.
need to survive and thrive.
Okay, the whole Russian thing with the
Wow.
with the
Yeah.
expression on your face, that one, I don't have enough of a point of reference for that, other than like movies and stuff. My family, while I was away at college or something like that, they actually had a foreign exchange student come and visit them, lived with them for a year or two from Russia, and he has since moved back and he lives there with his family, and he's a teacher at I think like the University of Moscow or something. But
Oh, cool.
but he doesn't have that stereotypical Russian look and attitude. For years and years, I would get an email from him every Christmas. All the family would. He'd send out these emails to everyone on Christmas and New Year's and on each of our birthdays saying happy birthday, happy New Year, and all of that stuff. He was a very, very happy person, so he didn't quite fit that stereotypical Russian look.
It's not necessarily like a stereotype to the people they know and love.
Oh, it's New
Right,
York City.
like-
We have that. You just need to move to New
It's
York,
strange.
right?
It's New York City, right? If you're walking
Yeah.
in New York City, no one's going to be smiling at you. Right?
Oh,
You're
yeah.
on the go.
Mhm.
And that's similarly if you're in a large city, sort of anywhere. No one's
Yeah.
going to be all that friendly, maybe except Chicago. Like,
Yeah.
'cause that's where I'm from. We're very much like, oh, do you need help with that?
Mhm.
I'll help you find it.
Of course.
But like, I mean, all the Russians that I know and I'm friends with are very kind and loving,
Yeah.
but I'm not a stranger to them.
Right.
Like I am a friend to them.
You've got that
So why would-
relationship. Much better.
you have to have that. But like I would just walk around like, all the time because that's how I naturally walk. I'm very bouncy. And like old ladies would be like, "Девушка, где metro?" And I'd be like, "Oh, perfect. I'll tell you where the metro is." And that's like describing them like you gotta walk across the street, go up these stairs, go over that platform. And they'd be like, "Oh, it's Americanski, девушка. Oh, like you're so cute. But your Russian is terrible." And then they'd be like,
Yeah. My line for that, because I only took a little bit of one second language, a little French when I was in junior high school, and I was honestly terrible at it. So, I can honestly say to anybody anywhere in the world, no matter how little American English they speak, their English is still going to be way better than my German, Italian, Russian, anything. I just know a few words here and there. That is amazing that you lived there long enough to pick up that much of the language. That's really cool.
I was there for 3 years.
Wow. That's
Oh,
awesome.
wow.
I'm sure your brother lived in India for 3 years. I'm sure he picked up something either regionally, whatever region he lived in, whatever the state language was, or the national language being, well, it's not necessarily the national language, but Hindi being the national language of the North,
Right.
right? Like depending on where he was, because I had to learn Hindi when I was living in India as well, and I'm nowhere near and as good in Hindi as I was in Russian. But
Nice.
I could get by, right? I could find the bathroom, I could get to the metro, I could order something, like,
Mhm.
and I could be pleasant enough with people I was talking to.
I might be able to be pleasant if I could use Google Translate or something a whole lot. And I could find my way to the metro, but I'd be using Google Maps to do it.
Right.
If you had the
Oh,
internet. Right?
Yeah.
That helps.
Yes, exactly. What if cell towers are down or something, you know?
I had an iPhone 4 and it was 2011 in India, and I had like a certain number of gigs per month on my phone plan, and if I had none left, figure it out,
Yep.
which made it more fun. Like,
Yeah, some people
Yeah,
just don't identify with the limited phone plan thing. Sorry, yeah, Sam, go ahead.
yeah. No. What did you have to do in those situations when you didn't have data? Did they have like city maps and things you'd buy, or were you just asking questions to
just talk to
find your way
people.
around? Yeah.
I'm from the Midwest originally, not from Utah, and so we generally there's no strangers there. It's just friends you haven't made yet. So if
Okay.
you're wandering and you're lost, you just ask for help.
Mhm.
And like we had
Okay.
a guest coming once. She was a full foreign student from Germany, also on a full break, and we had given her our metro station, and she didn't have reception in our state. And so she got there, but we couldn't get a hold of her. And I was like, oh no, like, this isn't good. She found her way to our apartment anyway. And I was like, how'd you find it? She's like, I just asked them where the white people lived. And we were relatively well known in our neighborhood because there was a
Yep.
group of 4 of us living there, right? And so we all were in and out all day. It's easy enough to find us. So generally,
Yeah.
we could just ask for help or talk to somebody, and they'd be like, "Oh, Beta, I help you know," or find an old lady, right? A good babushka, like a good auntie, anywhere you find babushka be the Russian, but always trust in the old ladies.
Nice.
They've obviously survived. They've obviously made it through. They'll help you out.
Right. Wow, that's incredible. Jeremy, do you have any questions you want to ask
Yeah.
Kim?
I had one question for you, Kim. Knowing what you know today, and this, you can think of this in terms of, you know, what kind of advice would you give somebody who's younger, starting out, trying to find their passion, or, you know, if you want to prefer to think of it in terms of what would I tell myself if I could go back in time and tell myself 20 years ago or whatever, what would I do differently? You know, what kind of advice would you have for a younger version of yourself or for other people who may be really struggling to find their passion in life?
I don't think I had a problem finding a passion. I had a problem paying for it. So that's why I ended up being a teacher. I got more scholarship money to be a teacher. Like that would allow me to go to college. I guess if you were struggling to find it, I'd say look for more things. Because even now, like during the pandemic, when work slowed down and everything was at home, I was trying to find nursing schools online. I was like, found my time. I could finally afford it. I'm going to go to medical school. Like, or just start getting my way in there. So I maybe never give up. And continue to find ways to pursue the avenues that you want to go. Like I was quite limited at 17 to be like, oh, I have to go to college and I have to be able to pay for it. And what can I do to help my parents as much as I can, right? Get as many scholarships as I can. And a lot of my scholarships came with like the obligation of you will study X topic, right? You will become a teacher and teach in a school of need, or you will become a teacher and teach this subject. So you go with where it is. And I think for a lot of kids right now, that's what you have to do to be able to pay for college.
Yeah.
As the costs get more and more exorbitant. But I guess if you can find something that can pay you, you can eventually follow your dreams if you can afford to. That's terrible advice. Let me try again. Wow.
Isn't
No,
that, isn't it weird?
It made me feel really bad for a second. Because I mean that was my reality. Because you can dream and do whatever you want as a kid. But then I guess the world limits you as you get older. Like my son currently is obsessed with fire trucks. So is my neighbor Tyler. He's 2. And they love fire trucks. But being a career fireman, I mean, if you're a rescue fireman in the summer, you're going to be battling wildfires and inhaling smoke and having more damage to your body in the long run and probably having to leave that career. It won't last you forever. But I have an uncle who is a fire chief and he had a great career and loved it. So like, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully you could do sort of whatever you really dream to do if you have the avenue to get there. I think that's hard for a lot of kids now because they're not even sure what they dream to do. And then they lack the avenues to find their way towards that.
I think there are kind of 2 messages that I might get from that, and forgive me if I'm reading into it more than you intend. But number one, sometimes we get really stuck on an idea, And that can be a little too much. Sometimes we need to look for something else and find other avenues. And if our life is sort of limited in some ways, and like in a lot of public schools, if they've eliminated certain types of programs, whether it's the arts or some other things, they may not be able to find their passion. And in some cases, the school experience is where they get to learn that. On the other hand, having the tenacity to keep pursuing a dream, even though it's difficult, is a good life lesson. So you don't want someone to get so frustrated that they give up in frustration, but you also don't want someone to feel like I chose this when I was 6 years old and I can't change my mind. They need to know you can totally change your mind. Your passions can change and should and probably will change over time.
Too, right? Like I taught kindergarten, first and second grade for a long time. Like they want to be animal trainers and biologists, and they want to ride dolphins, and whatever topic we're learning about. Right at that point in time, ocean season creatures is a key stage 1 topic in the British curriculum, and that's what I taught in Russia. We were all obsessed with boats. We wanted to ride an octopus, right? We were really in it to win it at that point in time. And so once we moved on to the next topic, our goals changed as well as 6 and 5-year-olds and 7-year-olds. Like, man, now I really want to be this, because we should be exposing kids to as much as we physically can to open their minds up and open their worlds up to the different opportunities that are out there. Yeah. But if you're limited geographically, and by that I mean where the school you go to is typically funded by your local tax dollars, and depending on where you live determines the quality of education you get. American education system, that'll often limit your future projection. Like unless you have someone or something that is providing you a different outlet for learning or resources, which is a bummer.
Yeah. I think at least I personally had some benefit in that. My parents were kind of interesting that way. My dad was a college professor, and my mom was a school teacher for a time, both in like a middle school, then in a like a business college. But then she took over the family business from my grandpa, who started it. I don't know how many, 50, 60, 70 years ago. And so I got the educational side of it from my dad, but he was in outdoor education. So we got to go along with his stuff. He had the most amazing job in the world. He's getting paid as a college professor to take people on hiking and backpacking trips and teach them how to ski and all of this stuff. So we got to go along and we learned downhill skiing with the college classes at these amazing ski resorts that are nearby in Utah. But I also, every spring, there was no such thing as a weekend for us because we all worked at the family business all spring long because it was seasonal, growing plants to sell people if they could put in their gardens, flowers and vegetables and all that stuff. And I learned the hard way what hard work was. And we make jokes about it because myself and all my siblings, after working there all summer, every summer, we all knew that we really didn't want to work at the greenhouse. So we all got college degrees so we wouldn't have to work at the greenhouse. And then when my mom got...
Then to help though, right?
Yeah, to a point. One of my brothers got drawn into it for a while. In the end, it wasn't myself or any of my siblings that ended up taking over the business because we wanted the business to be generational and continue. It was one of my cousins. He and his wife stepped up and they have taken it over. And I'm so glad because that was just so much work all the time. Now, if I had been in charge, I probably would have built more automation and stuff. But, that's me. I'm a tech guy, so that's my thing. But that gave me this amazing exposure to, if you put it onto a political spectrum, you could think of the college professor tends to be much more on the liberal side, and a business owner tends to be on a more conservative side. So we had this incredible mix of points of view in the family that we all got to discuss openly and understand, and that also gave us great ideas for what we could be. And my world was very focused on technology because, in my mom's words, we'd go into a room when I was 3 or 4 years old and I'd go and count the outlets in the room, or I would look for technology. I mean, as much as there was at that time. And had siblings, some of which were very technology focused. But one of my siblings, human resources, leadership professional, C-suite level at big companies, not really technology, but we were all raised in the same family. But because of this broad range of experiences, we all benefited from that and could choose our own path. And I think there are a lot of kids growing up that don't get those kind of opportunities. So I completely understand what you're saying, that our world is often defined by where we grow up and who we grow up with. And how can we make that better so that people can learn and be exposed to other things? Because we may have a new Mozart that grows up in a business family, and she doesn't get the opportunity to write music, or someone who's a business genius who grows up in an agrarian culture where there is no business opportunity. How can we improve that? That's one thing that I think, at least what I've read, Russia is really good at identifying skills
What you do at a young age.
and prodigies when they're young, and then they put them into focused programs and
I mean, is
teach
it
them.
identifying or is it cultivating?
Yeah,
Right?
I don't
Like,
know. Yeah, which one?
I don't know. Would you have wanted to go into an intensive program when you were 5 and never learned anything else, Jeremy? You're somebody who
Yeah,
likes to learn different things, right? You
right.
had all these varied experiences that have led
Mhm.
you to the life you had. And if someone had said you're going to be an electrical engineer at 5 and then put you in electrical engineering programs, you wouldn't have experienced the rest of
Yeah,
those things because your life would have been that one thing. I don't think
yeah.
you would have liked that at all.
I think you're right. And part of that, that's why we have in our younger school years so much general education, right? You're learning the basics of a lot of different things. So hopefully you don't, repeat the mistakes of other cultures. And we don't want to not learn about history, or we're doomed to repeat it, right?
Yeah. I think I'm going to say something random. I think
Hmm.
newspapers were a really big part of my life and how that
Hmm.
exposed me to different things. Because my parents, they couldn't, right? My dad was a salesman and my mom worked as a typist in like a publication company. And neither of those things I wanted to do. But every morning we read the Chicago Trib. And so I would read world news. My brother would read the comics. Like we would go over the things. And at that point, I was like, I need to find a way to get to those places. And the only way I'm going to get that is to get a job that will get me there. And I could teach internationally, or I could be a doctor. And it was the life focus. So I already knew what I wanted, but I had to get there somehow. But I could read the news every day and learn about different things. And now that the news is digital for the most part, like my dad will email me the Trib every morning, don't tell the Trib, and I'll read it, but I'm not as excited. I want to hold the Trib, right? I want to be able to page through the pages. I want to read what's happening in Syria. I want to read an article that's in depth about FIFA corruption. I want to be able to read about Puerto Rico's generation of electric energy through solar power and how they could reach 100% renewable energy resources by 2050. I want to read that in a newspaper to learn more, to do more that I could be interested in. And like, if you're a kid now who doesn't have access to the newspaper, you might have access to a computer, but if you're a kid, you're usually Googling weird stuff and watching random things on YouTube, like another kid play Minecraft for 7 hours. So you're not necessarily seeking out the news because it's not just given to you anymore. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah,
Like,
that is
I'm
one.
Yeah.
trying to think of experiences that led me there, but I think the newspaper was a big part of that.
Yeah, it opens up your world. Go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just saying it's interesting how much things have changed in such a short amount of time. I remember in college, and it wasn't all that long ago that I was in college, but they had the Wall Street Journal and New York Times just freely available in the hallways. You just pick them up. And one of my professors said, you should read the front page of these papers every day just to be informed. And nowadays, like you're saying, Kim, if kids have access to information, it's through like a phone, and they're Googling weird random stuff, just for entertainment value. It's not necessarily to educate themselves or to kind of just poke around at different interests and possibilities and things.
I mean, I Google weird random stuff. My husband's 39 and he still Googles weird random stuff. But like, part of that is we see something, right? We watch something on Netflix and we're like, oh, I'll learn more about that thing. And then I'm sure my Google history would be like, what is wrong with this person? But I'll see it, I'll read it, like just with the school shooting that happened in Nashville. I was like, man, I wonder how many school shootings happened when I was that age. Looked them up, right? Because I was like, I can't remember now. Like, I remember Virginia Tech when I was in college. Like,
Mhm.
I remember other large ones, but when I was in elementary school, what was happening? Looked that up. Like, so there's nothing wrong with a random Google search. I will not discredit that. But
Right.
to be able to be given, like, here's what's happening in the world today. You don't have to search for yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have to like determine whether the news is false or not, right? Because now you can read stuff on the internet where you're like, I know that to be actually wrong.
Mhm.
Like, I know
Yeah.
that's wrong, but it's being published and people are reading it and they're thinking, that could be right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that fits my worldview. That is absolutely correct. And now you have to determine, right? That makes it even harder for people that are young today to figure out what's real and what's not real. And that'll build their view of life, right? If they're only reading news sources from a specific viewpoint, like I didn't just read the Trib, but that was the primary that was delivered at home. We also got the Northwest Herald from two political spectrums, so I had a good balance. Trib obviously being better. Sorry, McHenry. But like, if you're only seeing one method of news source now, or you Google one version and you're reading the New York Post all the time, or you're reading one specific website, you're only getting one specific viewpoint, as things have got more polarized over time too. So even if you had exposure, if you only have exposure to one thing, how are you growing your mindset?
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, man. Freaks me out. I keep thinking of my almost 11-month-old sleeping behind me in the other room, and being like, better not fail you. Like, what will happen if I don't provide you all these outlets to think and grow and learn from?
Yeah.
Because you can't
How
grow
do you,
up just to play Minecraft, right? Like, that's not necessarily a career I believe in. I'm sure some people are making millions out of it off of YouTube, but I can't, because you're not contributing to society in some manner. And I think a large part of me thinks you still have to do that in order to be a good citizen.
right. And how do you feel? So you shared some really interesting experiences, having lived in India and Russia and other things too, having exposure, the exposure that you have, that you've had. How do you feel some of your experiences, especially as you're in your maybe later teens and college years, things like that, kind of this formative time when you really have to make a decision for your career. I hate to say it like that because you can always change your career path anytime. But how do you feel that those experiences that you've had changed or influenced your path? Maybe not, and not just necessarily career-wise, but like personally or whatever. How do you feel those things changed you?
I had to choose quite young because I started college at 17, and my college scholarship that was the largest one said, you will teach in a school of need in Illinois for 5 years, or when you graduate, it will be a school of need. So there wasn't really a deviation. But each summer, as part of that college scholarship, before I even went to college, I lived downtown Chicago. I went to classes every morning, or I went and taught in a local school every morning. The scholarship program bused you there. They provided you a cooperating teacher, provide you mentorship. You came back to the university. They did classes all afternoon, and that's for 6 weeks. So you enter college with like, well, I'm going to be a teacher now. I don't have an option. And then the next summer, they do it again, right? You had that program again to provide you more classroom experience, more teaching time with mentor teachers who are brilliant, who are providing you instruction of education for diverse learners. You're talking about classroom management and how to have empathy as a teacher. So like all of those things shaped me to becoming a better teacher as I went through them. But then the third summer of this program, it's called Golden Apple Scholars of Illinois. They used to give you the summer off. And they said, if you're behind on your college classes, time to catch up. Or if you're not, you can go work at a summer camp, or you can go work internationally, do whatever. Like, as long as you can prove that you're working with kids. And a group of us were like, let's go do some volunteer work in Tanzania. So we did. And then I got a bunch of the girls from our scholarship program together to work at a summer camp called Camp Upagani, which at the time was the only African-American owned camp in the United States, by Kevin and Natasha. Kevin is a former lawyer who decided to run a summer camp to bring a variety of girls from all backgrounds, experiences, walks of life, to be like, this is a purposely diverse camp. Because camps in the United States were brought up mostly as insular areas, right? Jewish communities made their own camps because they were prohibited from using other areas of resource. You had church groups are like, this is the Methodist girls summer camp. This is the Jewish girls tennis camp. This is the boys horseback camp, right? They're usually, boys camps usually Boy Scouts, right? But like, they're very isolated. They're typically bringing one homogenous group together, as homogenous as it could be, right? Like, we're all people interested in this thing. So it's a super interesting experience as well to work with a diverse set of women. And at an all-girls camp, the only male there was our boss and his infant son, Nico, at the time. And like, you had those experiences that, okay, I'm okay with teaching in a diverse environment and working with a variety of different people. And when I went back to college, I was like, I will apply for a Fulbright grant. Why not? Got it. And then continued on. So each experience sort of solidified the choice instead of changed it, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting. It helps you to identify that you're on the road that you want to, or you're on the path that you wanted to be on.
And at the original path from those Tribune articles was I wanted to be somewhere else. I wanted to get out of my small town. And that shaped my whole life. Like, I made some friends when I was growing up, and I was like, I'm getting out. This is the goal. And my parents knew that. Like, I want to leave here. Like I railed against it all the time. And that's not a bad thing. It's a great place to have grown up. But every step I took was trying to get me farther away. And then I like literally went across the globe, terrified my parents. But like at the same time, I needed that adventure. So I don't know, nothing that happened in my formative years changed my choice. It only solidified it more. So
Okay.
that's an
Yeah.
opposite answer to your question, Samuel.
No,
But at
no,
the same time, it's realistic for me.
no, that's good because, sometimes experiences you have help you to identify that you're not on the path you want to be on. But other times it like you said, helps you identify like, I really do love
Want to
this.
be here. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the
Yeah.
kids in my scholarship program that went through the first and second summers, they were like, I do not want to be a teacher anymore. And they dropped
Yeah.
out and they had to pay that money back. But it did at least sort of weed them out prior to the classroom time. And like the pandemic is also weeding a ton of people out, right? Because teaching has gotten unbearable for most teachers. And it's not just teaching the students, it's parent interactions with the classroom. It's entire states banning books because God forbid the children have books, but definitely give them guns, right? Like teaching has become a very different profession than what I imagined it was when I was a third grader, wanting to emulate, Mrs. Buck, Mrs. Hagen, Mrs. Iserman, Mrs. Berger. Those ladies were the core of like, I could be those people. And I left teaching in 2019. My husband's job moved us to Utah. And the state of Utah wouldn't give me my teaching license. They said the Illinois program wasn't as rigorous. And I laughed. And then they offered me the starting salary of like 28 grand. And then I also laughed and applied at a bunch of tech companies and got jobs. And I was like, well, here I go. I'm out now. I'll go back. My license is still fully up in Illinois. I've done all my accreditation so that when it expires this June, I get it for another 5 years. I fully anticipate that I go back there one day, right? Because pandemic hasn't ruined it for me. I'm sure once I go back and I see where all the changes at, I'm gonna be fighting it real hard. And when parents are like, I don't really want my child to learn about the Renaissance because sculptures there were naked in Florida, I'd be like, bummer. Like, I don't care at this point because it's a public education for the goal of the public good to publicly educate the youth of our nation so that they are able to publicly contribute. If you would like to have a private education, pay for that or homeschool. I feel very strongly about that at this point, as you see more and more states and families exert influence on public schools. Utah, being a strong member of that, Jeremy, you live in the Alpine School District, very concerned, right? Children shouldn't be learning those things, but they should be in classrooms with 30 kids, right? Because that's totally equitable for instruction. So it's where's our focus, right? We don't want kids to be reading specific books. We don't want them to be exposed to certain things about life. God forbid we teach about, menstruation in the classroom. But at the same time, having 35 kids per one teacher, whatever, mass shootings, thoughts and prayers. So it's a very weird world to be in education, where we care about some things very strongly, and other things are like,
yeah. And it's a challenging place to be, especially for teachers and administrators in education, because of all the pressures. There are laws that require them to do certain things, other laws that prevent them. You have to have a lot of legal expertise to avoid not stepping on somebody that needs something that aligns with the law, but it's harder to accommodate that. So
and you have to
that.
follow the law as a public school, like you're publicly funded by the state.
One thing that
it's
you
a very
said,
interesting issue.
One thing you said about the pandemic also brought my attention to something I read recently. While the pandemic was this hugely, disturbing force, it completely shook up the entire world in a lot of different ways. One thing was actually a really good outcome of that. One of the stories that people have, they go out and they get a job and they're not paid very well, and they want to change jobs because they know they can get better pay that way. But it's difficult to do that. It's hard to get time off. It's also a little bit scary in different ways. One of the things that actually worked out pretty well in the pandemic is when everything shut down. Yes, that was a big mess. But it also meant that a lot of those people whose jobs went away, because in some cases the companies shut down or said, well, you're fired until such time as we can rehire you, they went and found other jobs. And the payments in the meanwhile kept them from going under, and that worked out well. Now, yes, there's some side effects that contributed to the massive inflation that we see now. Despite it all being blamed on things very recently, I think a lot of it was actually cooked up in the middle of the pandemic. We just didn't see it yet. But that having been said, that gave people mobility. They were able to change jobs, move into other careers and other opportunities that they didn't before. And a lot of people now are doing a lot better in terms of their jobs than they were beforehand. So even though it was a big disaster and a big mess, it did turn out to be a really good thing for a lot of people.
In a lot of cases, yes. And then it's become not a great thing for public education because as more teachers have seen that they can leave the class, I've helped
And they go
mentor
somewhere
teachers
else.
leave
Yeah.
the classroom, right? They'll message me and be like, I'm going to apply for this job. I'm like, great. Let's look over your resume. Let's make it relevant for a business, right? Because what you're doing as a teacher is relevant. You're managing X number of projects at a time. You're managing different scenarios. You're providing structure. You have to plan things well in advance. You're taking notes. You're doing a lot of work. It's a nonstop work day. Like you can apply that. But then once those teachers leave, what is left for the public education students?
Yeah.
Right? And you're going to see a larger and larger group of teachers leaving because it's no longer tenable for them. They don't have flexibility to care for their own children. The hours are insane. You never have time to plan. The expectations of the state are getting more and more, not rigorous either, just more and more stupid, right? Like you're getting more and more rules you have to follow. And you can't say this, and oh, someone's offended here, and this parent is very upset about the way you've said X, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you could just go to a tech job where I'm at now, no one's doing that.
Yeah.
Right? It's a much calmer environment. Where I'm at is right now is perfect for being able to also raise my child. But if we have that many teachers leaving the classroom, what happens to the next generation of students
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't have teachers who are passionate about teaching that, and some of those people are sticking with, right? But there's a lot of empty places in every district and in every state. I think in Illinois, there's like 1,300 placements that aren't currently filled. In New Mexico, there's like over 1,000 that are like empty teaching roles that we don't have someone who's a qualified teacher teaching it. I thought Utah was trying to pass a bill that said, hey, you don't have to be an actual teacher.
Just
come
to
on in.
bridge the gap.
Right.
Not
Just to
even
fill
bridge
out.
the gap. They weren't even putting a timestamp on the end of when they would want that to stop. So they wanted to just get, able-bodied adults in the classroom because you need someone there. Because we don't have childcare access in the United States in public schools, or what that is for working parents. And at the end of the day, when schools fail, capitalism also fails because we sort of need children to be able to go somewhere so that parents can work.
Yeah.
Like it's all interconnected. But if we drive teachers out of the classroom, who's going to teach those kids?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're the same women force, right? Like, whew.
That's rough that we're losing so many teachers who are going into other jobs. One of my best teachers in high school, I've told Sam about this before, but my very best teacher in high school was a drama, debate, stage crew, photography teacher. So, but he came at it completely the opposite direction. He had been running his own business. He made an unfortunate merger with another company that ended up bankrupting him. He lost out on that, and he began teaching because he enjoyed doing some of these things. In addition to being the teacher, so I got involved because of some of the technical sides of it, but it was one of the most amazing opportunities for me because if you're not familiar with Asperger's syndrome, part of the autism spectrum, very introverted kind of people, a lot of us, like myself, are very technically minded, but have a lot of trouble with social skills. And it may not appear quite so much now because I'm pretty good at interacting with people. But part of where I learned a lot of that was in my theater classes in high school with this teacher, most amazing teacher. He went out of his way to try and create additional experiences and also enhance things for not just his students, but the community. He mortgaged his house to the limit, bought a 100-year-old church and converted it with a bunch of our students, all of us help, into a community theater. And we did shows and everything. There was tons of fun. So he's somebody who had come from the business world and became a teacher, and I'd love to see more people going that direction. I personally would love to go and be a technology teacher, and I'm hoping that the stars align that happens. In the meanwhile, so like our connection, I'm teaching online through Pluralsight courses, but I don't get that direct personal interaction. I don't get that direct relationship with the learners the way that you do in a more of a classroom, or at least a real world hands-on environment, right?
I want to call it two things you said. One, I totally think it's applicable for experienced people in a field to become teachers. right?
Hmm.
Who are willing to become teachers and learn how to be a teacher. One of
Yeah.
my best teachers was my AP biology teacher, Mr. Levon, who was a researcher in the 80s doing medical research on AIDS. Like he had life experience in
Hmm.
biology and moved into teaching because it better suited the life circumstances he had at the time. It was fantastic. But you also mentioned that this hero teacher of yours, which I say this like this because we expect teachers to be heroes, right?
Yeah.
He mortgaged his house to the limit to build you a community theater area, which is awesome and incredible. But we cannot expect individual humans who also have lives and children and families to give everything of themselves because it is a job, right? But
Yeah.
as teaching is often a calling or a profession, and you got to do it for the kids. And that's used often to manipulate teachers who are primarily women and primarily underpaid to do it for the kids. Like, do it for free. You know, we need you to stay after school today for 2 hours and do X, Y, Z.
Right.
And it's great when people are dedicated and have the time to do that. And I did, right? I'd be after school doing all the things and running the clubs and having a grand old time and coaching girls on the run and teaching robots. I liked doing it. But at what point is that tenable?
Hmm.
And what point does it become untenable? Like,
Yeah.
it's amazing that this man was able to mortgage his house, build you an amazing community. Like, that is awesome. And I love that.
Hmm.
And that's the things we like to hear coming out of education, right? Like,
Yeah.
this teacher did everything for their students. They're heroes. She sacrificed her life for the kid. Wow, what an incredible dedication. But does that make the teachers who show up at 7:45 for class to start at 8 and leave at 3:30 when class ends at 3:15, does that make them bad? Or does it make them someone doing their job?
Yeah.
Which is hard because we've conflated those two things in America.
Hmm.
Like, if you are to be a teacher, you have to give everything. And I think a lot of teachers now are saying, no,
Yeah.
like we're over that, which is crazy. Like, it makes
Yeah.
me worried. Like, props to that dude. But also, like, what if that had failed? There goes his house.
Yeah.
Like, as a kid, I was like, you could totally do that. All teachers should be that way. And now as an adult, like a mortgage, bills, I'm like, ooh, I feel like there's a limit where I have to put my own family safety
Hmm.
and needs above that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And by the way, it did eventually have to shut down. And had things gone badly, he would have lost his house. Fortunately, he was able to work out with the mortgage holder to sell it back because at the time, of course, I don't know, property values were probably increasing and it was probably a good deal for the mortgage holder or something like that. But try doing that now, the way, the way prices of real estate goes up and down. That happens to somebody now. Yeah, they're bankrupt for a very long time. And he was the most amazing teacher, and my kids are still jealous because their high school theater teacher did not nearly have the amazing. I mean, seriously, in a lot of the schools we have, there's this whole competition. It's a lot like it's kind of the bad sports coaches. You get the sports coaches who will only put in their first string because they got to win every single game. I get that, but you're also here to teach and inspire and build young women and young men, not just to be athletes, but to be good citizens. And even those who are not the first string best player on the team really also need to spend time on the field, and they need to learn too. So we had a similar kind of experience with some of the theater stuff where it's just the few kids are always the stars and nobody else is. My theater teacher was incredible. I didn't even appreciate it at the time, but we would do this, we did a run of Grease for, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 shows over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. And of course, we all ended up getting laryngitis half the way through it because that's a lot of singing. But he was amazing. We all knew each other's parts, and he let us play different parts. The theater teachers now, at least the ones that our kids have been interacting with, no way. They wouldn't let him switch things up like that at all. But this teacher was so good. He would make sure that, if you want to trade up parts, it was incredible so that when somebody had their extended family coming, they had 20 or 30 people, their friends, their family, whatever coming, they would get to play the part that they wanted to do the best. It might have been the lead. It might not have been the lead, but it was a part they could shine in. And he was so incredible at accommodating that. And I didn't realize how rare that was as a teacher. He was just
He cultivated
amazing.
an environment, right? He cultivated a place where you could be.
Yeah.
And that's not a skill that every teacher has,
Yeah.
right? But it's also not a skill that every teacher is allowed to have anymore. Like, you can cultivate an amazing environment in your classroom, but one parent calls and complains and you've got a chastisement on your record, right? You're in trouble.
Yeah.
At your next performance review, you're not doing so well. Maybe you won't get tenure anymore, right? There was probably, and I'm not saying you're older than me, Jeremy. I'm not going to allude to that in any manner.
Just a little.
But touch. And you also grew up in Utah, which is also its own little microcosm in its own place, where things are a bit more homogenous in many ways, and a bit more like older fashioned, Like it
Yeah.
feels like I'm a little bit back in time when I'm here, which isn't a bad
Yeah.
thing. Right? There's still kids who ride their bikes around our neighborhood and ding dong ditch, and they have a grand old time doing it. And everybody has a doorbell camera, but it
Yeah.
feels like I'm in a different time sometimes. But if you don't have the support of the community around you, right, to do those things, like you're a drama teacher, obviously cultivated an environment where everyone felt like they could participate, and the
Yeah.
parents weren't calling him up and saying, "How dare you take the lead away from my son? I'm going to report you to the principal," because that does happen, right? And now
Yeah.
you have to deal with those pressures so much more. You could tell the kid like, "Hey, you did this question wrong," right? And the kid could go home and tell their parents that you told them they were dumb, and that parent could come back in and attack you
Hmm.
verbally, physically in a lot of cases nowadays. But that misconstruction, especially because schools are no longer like hubs of communities, right? People are no longer nearly as connected as they were. I had a student from Honduras once say something that was pretty racist to an African American student, and I told her that. And I was like, that expression is unkind, right? We can't say that here. Like in English, we can't use those terms, and that would be considered racism in the United States. And her mom came in storming in after school because I called her daughter racist and yelling and screaming at me. And I was like, that's not what happened. Here's the 5 kids who were part of the conversation. Here's what did happen. I was very calm. But at the end of the day, parents being mad and the access to the internet can say anything they want about a teacher, right? And that
And
can
it'll
push a teacher out.
blow up on social media, and then they get a bad name and everything
Every
all at once.
district's got their own page, right? Where all the parents can talk
Oh
about
yeah.
it. Most schools have a page where the parents can report on it.
Yeah.
Like, or talk about what's going on. And that is very hard then to have credibility in your classroom. If you're a teacher, say a drama teacher now, who wants to share the roles, but the parents of the leads aren't happy about that. So they start
Yeah.
talking about that. And then they start saying, well, he shouldn't be the teacher. Like, I don't think this teacher's good to my kids. And it expounds from there. There's a
Yeah.
weird amount of pressure now externally, instead of viewing it as like, hey, we're working together. Like when I worked in Russia, I worked in an international school, and I had really good relationships with most of the parents, some that I still talk to today. And I left Moscow in 2016, right? Like, and their kids are now in high school, and I taught them when they were 6. But we work together, right? Like we talk and
Yeah.
like, what you're doing at home is great. Here's how I'm going to support that in the classroom. There was none of that, like, oh, I'm scared. I don't like you because you said this to my kid. There was a definitely different environment. They trusted me to be their kid's teacher, and I trusted them to be their kid's parent. But in the US, I did not have that experience as much. I had a lot more like, how dare you say that to my kid? I'm like, well, that's the scientific fact, right? Like, it's an egg, and then
Yeah.
it becomes a baby when it is expelled, right? Like these are
Yeah.
the steps to the life cycle of humans. I can't not teach that according to
Yeah.
the law and according to the science curriculum in Illinois. Like I sort of have to do that. That's not what my family believes. Bummer, right? Like
Yeah.
I am required to teach these things, which goes back to like that if you can do something because of state and or federal requirements and parents don't agree, where do you go from there?
Yeah. I I don't want to don't take this. I'm not thinking in terms
Yeah.
of the requirements that way, but something that you said about the different teachers. It seems like the big school districts, like you said, Alpine School District here locally, they're huge, right? Very massively powerful. It feels like they could take advantage of the fact that they have such this incredible range of teachers. If we could get people that had teachers that are the best fit for certain personalities, and we could pair up students with them that way, we could probably have amazing educational outcomes for people in certain areas. You have someone who's very gifted in, in biology or something like that, and you get them with some of the biology teachers that can really inspire them. Maybe it was somebody who was previously a biologist, like your teacher was, or maybe it's somebody who could really help them open their minds to what if and doing totally new research. What if there were a way to do that?
So I would question them, thinking from a district perspective, who's going to pay for that time? When are
Yeah.
they going to be doing this professional development, Jeremy? Are they
Hmm.
going to be having to miss a school day? Will we need substitutes? Will we have to
Right.
pay these teachers for this professional development? How much will it
Hmm.
cost for us to get in this professional? Because that's what it boils down to,
Hmm.
right?
There
Like
was,
you want teachers to learn from each other, but when is there that time? Should we be making them come in on a Saturday?
yeah,
No. So most districts build in professional development time throughout the year, but then parents are mad that their kids aren't in school because this is the school year. Why aren't my kids getting taught? I need childcare on this day. So
yeah,
it's a very interesting, like, yeah, absolutely teachers should be learning from each other. My district in Illinois, the program that I was in was a STEM program. It was K through 5, and we taught all STEM programs at all the elementary schools, and there's like 11 of us. and we were split between multiple buildings. And one Friday a month, we got to get together. One Friday a month. And it was an early release day for the rest of the kids, but we could spend the day together planning and prepping. But we were just surviving. We weren't able to really learn from each other or talk about best practices or try to improve. It was just the only time we had together, because that's the only time the district could fit. And we were lucky to have that time. So like, when would we have had the chance to have additional professional development? I think once we went to Fermilab, which is the particle accelerator in Illinois, in Batavia. Cool. We got to go to Fermilab, awesome. Got to go to their nature center, awesome. But then the logistics of teaching 1,400 kids between 2 buildings, between K through 5, right? When am I going to be able to take that field trip? I could advertise it to the grade levels and see if they would be willing to go. There's no way I could be able to do that thing. Like, I could get professional development. I could sign up for additional classes. The district was super supportive about that. And you have to professional develop yourself to maintain your license in Illinois. So you have to take X number of hours. And the span of your license is years. I think it's like 122 if it's a 5-year license or something. So you have to get another degree or have to do professional development for teaching. But you have to do that on top of teaching. And it's usually unpaid, or you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
So it's great to continue education, but how do we make it work with taxpayer dollars?
A lot of the districts, they kind of have to create these all in, a single solution, one size fits all kinds of things. And it really seems like there needs to be a lot more flexibility in some of those kind of areas, doesn't there? Even not to go down COVID-19 pandemic route too far, but I think the school district here locally missed an opportunity, because there's a whole conflict between, who wants to be in person, who wants to be remote, and all of that. And they went one size fits all. Everyone's remote for a while, and then everybody has to be back all at once. It didn't allow for any flexibility. And it seems like from day one, they could have said, look, we know a lot of you guys just don't care about all of this, and we're going to keep the teachers and everybody who feel comfortable and want to. You can still meet in person. We're going to move everyone else online, and we'll be a little bit fluid for a while. We know it's going to be a mess, but the education would have still continued instead of just being shut down for a while, right? And I don't know if I've thought that through well enough, but do tell.
So in a lot of districts, they had kids who, like, once in the beginning pandemic, a lot of places in Illinois just went fully remote. And then a lot of places did just go fully remote if they had one-to-one devices and they physically could go fully remote. And then when transitions started coming back, a lot of districts were like, oh, the teachers can have, whoever kid wants to come in the classroom can come in the classroom. And then if you want to stay home and learn remote, you can still do that. You know how much work that is as a teacher?
Oh, yeah.
To try to manage the 15 kids that are in the classroom, but also the 6 kids on Zoom, and have to be able to look at them on the camera, because God forbid you're not paying them attention, because you're teaching them now. You're trying to manage their behavior in their bedrooms or at their home. If they walk away from the camera, what are you supposed to do at that point? What power do you have when they're in their home, right? And if their parents are there with them, like, there's a story that always runs around the internet where the woman was like, come back here, you can't eat during the classroom. And his mom was like, yes, he can, he's in his house. Who's the leader then at that point in time? And so you're managing now kids in person, kids on Zoom, having inequitable experiences because you're not being able to dedicate time to the kids in the classroom or time to the kids on Zoom. They can't do the same projects. If you're working on group projects in here, they can't be doing the group project. They can't be physically manipulating the materials if they don't have them at home. Like, a lot of teachers were like, nah, out. I'm not doing this anymore. And so they did do some classes fully remote. And some districts chose to have, like, if you're going to be in person, these 4 teachers will be teaching in person. So if you're going to stay remote, this one teacher will be teaching remote all year, right? Also difficult because teachers like kids. You go into teaching to interact with kids. You go into teaching to do great projects and to inspire their little minds and to provide opportunities for creativity and outlets for learning. And if you're staring at black Zoom screens all day because they shouldn't be forced to turn on their camera, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
How demotivating is that as a professional? Right? So I don't know. Each district did their best for the circumstances they were in and the continuous criticism that they were getting from all parents and all people. And each state's laws were different. So, like, some states were like, whatever, we're staying in person. Other states were like, go for it, get COVID for all I care. And other states were like, no, stay home.
Yeah, and then, of course, individual people. So, all right, I'm sorry. I've not been letting you talk at all, Sam, if you had a question or comment.
No,
this has been a lot of fun.
I like to listen. I don't even know why I'm doing a podcast sometimes, because I like to just hear other people. I guess that's why it's like I ask a question.
Jeremy and I just like to talk.
Yeah, no,
We do.
this
It's
is
fun.
good. I like hearing different. So we have really young kids and we homeschool, and so we didn't, the pandemic didn't really shake us up.
No.
Um, but we have plenty of friends, family, who we know who that was a big issue. And I have teachers in my family. My wife has teachers in her family, and they've all had to juggle these things, and it's been a real mess sometimes. I wish there was like just a solid solution for all this, but
Yeah.
There is
yeah,
that, right? We've
there's
created
not.
a society where typically both parents have to work now in order to be able to afford a mortgage and bills. And so if you're in a position to homeschool, that's great. Maybe you've already set that up. Maybe your wife can work remote. Maybe you're both working remote. Maybe your wife isn't working at this point and being a stay-at-home mom. Maybe you're a stay-at-home dad, Samuel. I don't know you, right? But at
Yeah,
some point, you had to create a world that accommodated for that choice. And
yeah,
you already had created that world. Whereas if you were thrust into that, the pandemic, and you're both working parents, I have a lot of friends who quit jobs. And they're like, well, I got to be home now. My kids are home. I have 3 of them. This is where we're at.
Yeah.
Or they were working women still who were struggling to find childcare because daycare shut down during the pandemic. Private daycare shut down, and most of them didn't reopen. Like there's been over, I think, 1,000 daycare centers that haven't reopened since the pandemic, which leaves women who are working in an even harder position to go back to work in the office because now offices are like, well, we thought remote work was great, but because we paid for
Not
these
anymore.
locations, we'd like you to be in them.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, like we have a mortgage on our building, so it'd be real cool if you were inside that building. Even though, a year ago we were like, we'll be remote forever, which makes it still difficult to get back into it. And it's like if you had the structural support set up prior to the pandemic to be successful with educating your children at home, or could flexibly make that work, or your company was super understanding, like Pluralsight like Mad Props, super understanding and caring for parents during that time period. If your company wasn't, though, you were shit out of luck. Like, you're like, well, your kids are your problem. You still have to work.
Yeah.
Good luck.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That brings up a question. I don't know when. Do we have time for another question, Jeremy?
Do one more
My next
question,
meeting's
and
not
then
for another like 20 minutes, so you're good.
we'll do one more question. Then we're going to have like a little bit of a wrap up and kind of get some final words from Kim.
Oh shit.
Okay, so I was curious, and you kind of alluded to this issue just barely. So for kind of for parents in general, but especially for women, because this is often an issue that comes up. How do you find the balance in life between, like, you have chosen to both have a family and have a career, and I can't even imagine how difficult that must be. And trying to balance all that time. I mean, you seem to have a lot of energy, but it's got to go way beyond just having enough energy to handle that. What's some advice that you'd have for little people today who may want to do both? Have a family and have a career. For little girls in particular, what are some tips or advice, or I don't know, challenges that you've faced along the way? How have you had to overcome those?
I think
Whatever comes to mind.
you have to accept that you're still the default parent or the primary parent, even if you're working full time, and that more things will be on you. And I struggle with that acceptance straight up. Not gonna lie to you about that. It's usually a very mental fight every day when my husband's like, I'm gonna go to the office, and doesn't have to think about like, oh, do I need to breastfeed right now? Well, I had to make dinner and it's gonna be a crock pot breastfeed. I'll need to start that at 7:30. None of those things live in his head, right? So
Yeah.
he still doesn't, it hasn't really affected him as much, right? We've had a kid, he loves our kid, but he isn't doing all the other things. So I say, if you're a young girl, I don't want to give them sad advice. I say, if you're an adult woman with a career and you'd like to have a child, think of how prepared you're going to need to be and plan yourself out. Right? I prep our meals. I have a list every week. I do the grocery shopping the week before. I have designated days for laundry. I have childcare. I pay to have it in our home so I can see my son during lunch and still breastfeed him. And it's paying out the ass, but there is no other daycare availability for me right now. I can't find spots. I'm 80th on a wait list at a local Montessori daycare for when he turns 18 months, and he's only 10 months right now, right? There's no way I'm getting that placement. There is no opportunity for me to have childcare for him. So I need to continue to work in order to pay for the childcare that I have because it is expensive. And I'd rather be able to pay for that because I still can pay for childcare and work and save money for his college and pay my bills. And if I wasn't working, we would struggle more as a family to do that. So I'd say being organized, which is not great advice for young ladies. So let's just tell little girls, like, you can be whatever you want to be. And then they're going to have to hit that reality later when they're like mentally capable of that. But if you start telling them when they're little, like, how are you going to balance motherhood and your career? No, if someone had said that to me when I was little, I'd been like, well,
Yeah.
no, what? I'm not going to have a baby. I'm 12, right? Like, no part of my head would have been there yet. So I wouldn't say anything to little girls about balancing a career and motherhood yet. I'd wait till like 20s, maybe teens, late teens, but not little. You at that point, you want them to think they can be anything and do anything, and that no barriers will stand in their way. Let them find those barriers later, right? Like once they get older and they realize society has set multiple barriers for them, right? Or if they speak up a bit too loud at a meeting, their mentor will tell them, maybe you should just hold off. Like let other people speak before you. You're a bit much of a contributor. You know, don't tell them that in the beginning. Let them sort of figure that out later, and don't let that crush them. That would suck. We're not giving any advice to young girls right now, Samuel, about balancing childhood, children, and their career.
Okay.
Let them think they can do it all.
With the
Did
baby at the 9-month-old kind of range, it's no wonder because you're not getting any sleep at all.
No, I mean, I'm getting enough sleep, right? But I'm also still human. And I think that would have been a huge demotivator if I was 10. And then my teacher was like, well, how do you plan on balancing motherhood and your career? I'd have been like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, that shouldn't even be my concern at this point. I'm 10.
Yeah.
And as an adult, you have to build up the resources you can to figure that out. You have to be structured. You have to schedule yourself. And not a lot of parents do that, and they find it difficult. And my husband is like, man, you keep us really regimented. I'm like, yeah.
So it works.
I would like to keep my sanity. But yeah, if you had told me that at 8, that I'd have to balance a career and raising my own family, and that there'd be a constant divide of not doing enough at work and not doing enough at home, I've been a real buzzkill for 8-year-old me.
Yeah. Did you, when you were younger, did it ever enter your mind that, someday you'd want to get married, someday you might want to have a family? Or was it all like career?
I was going to get out of my small town and have a job. Or I was going to be like a cool lady who had an apartment in a city. And then I was. I did exactly what I hoped for, right? Because I wanted that. I hadn't seen that in my life. Most of the people I knew, that my mom, she got married young, she had kids. And they waited a while to have kids. And that was a weird thing at that time period. Like they waited 9 years after they got married, or 8 years to have me. And I'm the first. My mom was like, well, I wanted a life first. Yeah, I also want a life first. And I think that helps that I had children later too. Like I'm able to balance that now. I think and I told my husband that recently, I'm like, if I had a kid at 22, I don't think I could have done it. I'm sure I could have. There'd be some deep innate part of myself that's like, you will take care of your child and survive. But now I'm far more financially stable. I've had experiences that are able to generate a world for my kid that I couldn't have done if I was 10 years younger. And I have a better sense of self. And at 22, I was living in India, having a grand old time. I would not have been ready to change that about my life. Guys, you're making me real introspective here. I'm not loving it.
No, this is great conversation, Kim. This is great. No, because
awesome.
these are, obviously, your personal life impacts your professional life. If your personal life is just down the toilet, then how's your professional life looking? And so these are all things that you have to consider and that we don't often talk
let you
about.
do that, right? Mike Pence last weekend made fun of Buttigieg, I think I said his last name right, taking paternity leave, but he called it maternity leave. Like, how dismissive for a Christian man like Mike Pence, who's strong family values, to dismissively not allow or make a joke about a man taking his paternity leave to spend time with his kids, right? Like, and that is still entrenched in the majority of careers and workforces. Men shouldn't be raising the children, the women should. And even then, we can't guarantee maternity leave. I think it was Missouri. It was a southern state, and it was last week. Senators are talking about 6 weeks paid maternity leave, and they're calling it paid vacation, because health and every single woman in that room is holding in what they are obviously feeling, right? Because if they act too strongly, then they're being too female and irrational, right? But they're like, I wouldn't call, ripping a baby out of my body full of stitches and bleeding everywhere, a 6-week vacation. 6 weeks is not even the legal limit that we allow puppies to be taken from their dog moms, right? It's 8 weeks. Right? We don't even take a puppy away from its dog mom that fast. But in America, at any age, right? Your puppy baby could be a week old, but you could be required to go back to work.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily care about family in America for as much as we are a Christian values nation. To care about balancing work and home. And it's hard for women, but even when men try, if they're trying to make inroads to caring for their own family, you're still getting belittled by major political figures.
Yeah.
Like, how is that fair?
Yeah.
I don't want to go to the good old days that everything was awesome, but there were some good sides of the old agrarian society when you had a family growing up living on a farm together and they're both learning from both of their parents day in and day out the various different tasks. Now, okay, they tended to sort of bifurcate those tasks into a his and hers kind of area, but ignoring that side of it for a moment, you're learning from your parents, both of them, all the skills that you needed to live in that society. And in a lot of ways, in some ways we've lost that, but that's because there's so much that you need to learn. There's no easy answer to all of this, but I really love the way that you've isolated and identified some of these really serious challenges. And I know there's not necessarily an easy answer that we can give to anybody for anything, but hopefully something encouraging and maybe just a little bit of a reality check. We don't want to give the 8-year-old ourselves the how are you going to do your work-life balance thing, but maybe it's just a little bit of when you see. Going back to our firefighter example, right? When you see that woman or man being a firefighter and you see them running into the building burning and saving lives and bringing out babies and saving people like that, that's just one tiny piece of their day. You don't see the fact that most of the time they are coiling up hoses and cleaning equipment and physically training so that they can carry whatever it is, 90 pounds or 150 pounds worth of equipment on their backs up and down stairs. It's not all that glory and amazing part, but it is still that. There is that piece of it. It doesn't matter which field you're in. In the teacher, there are those extremely rewarding moments, but there's also terrible stuff. And when you are a firefighter, there are some amazing parts to it, but there are also some really terrible parts. And hopefully you don't breathe too much smoke and get sick or anything like that, right? So hopefully we can encourage those who are trying to find their passions. Yes, find your passion, but don't get so starry-eyed that you think that there isn't also going to be a lot of hard work. There will be, but enjoy what you can, and remember that the hard parts get you there.
Yeah, and keep the childlike wonder. Right now, with the advent of the internet and the changes in society, children are children for as long as they could be children. I want you to grow up to think. I grew up to think teaching was fantastic. It wasn't till college-esque that I was like, well, shit, this is work. Man, these teachers are there all the time, right? I didn't have that cognizance. I just saw the starry-eyed brilliance, and I don't think I'd want to put that on anybody younger at this point, because we already are expecting children to grow up faster than they should and learn more about society and be aware of the downfalls and be politically correct when they're kids, right? Like, they're little. They should have the chance to experiment and fail without the repercussions an adult would have on failing. And if they say something stupid, they could be educated instead of, oh, this person's terrible, right? Like, we could take the time to educate children and allow them to grow, but now we don't really allow that anymore. That's why I got so worried when you're like, I don't want to tell 8-year-old me anything. Let me continue to be starry-eyed.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. You don't want to destroy someone's dreams before they have a chance to really develop.
I know you got me all worried about my son losing his chance to dream. Hormones, man, they're rough.
Yeah. There's a lot of scary ahead, but there's also a lot of amazing, great stuff ahead. And with you as his mom, he's going to turn out great and going to be fantastic. So don't be too worried. It's totally going to be awesome. So by the way, this has just been amazing. We know you've got to get going here in a couple of minutes. Just want to wrap up, and anyone who's watching, please like, comment, subscribe. Please leave messages if you want to get in touch with Kim. We can get you connected with her. She's awesome and amazing. And have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kim.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you, Kim.